Good evening. It's great to see such a wonderful audience here, though I must say I am deeply worried about all the so-called health and safety and fire hazards and all these things that you have to worry about. We really have to be careful that these R's and things are kept as clear as possible. But it's still wonderful to see so many of you. If I could also ask you to make sure that you do switch off your pagers, mobiles, friends from outside, whatever it is, switch them off. I think maybe a lot of you were here last week when Peter Smithson gave his talk about the patio and pavilion. And I think you know that there is, in fact, certain tendencies in this country and in some others that could be seen to be following from the tradition of brutalism and Team 10. And most of this work is probably exemplified by certain tendencies also towards the minimal. But I think one could also see that maybe if the work of the Smithsons and Team 10 had gone on differently, not so much in terms of, in a sense, the stylization of a particular period, but understanding the question of the brute force of certain materials, or the question of as found, not simply as the thing is, but in terms of how the thing is that then becomes transformed and becomes something else in terms of the imaginative possibilities and potentials of certain material practices, then the work of Foreign Office architects would really be an exemplification of the current condition of that work rather than its nostalgic reflection. I think for the last 8 or 9 years, Farshid, Moussavi, and Alejandro, Zaera, Polo have, through both their teaching, much of it done here at the AA, of course, as well as many other places. As you know, they were unit masters here until last year, addressed the question of what they always used to say in their prospectus pages as deterritorialization and reterritorialization, which one could say also as the as found that is reterritorialized, as becomes again, which is not really according to the notion of the appearance of things, but really addressing issues of data, everyday life, organizational structures in terms of material. The other side of the work, of course, which is linked to this, has been the fascination with the pragmatic, with pragmatism as well. And one can see in that work then both something which is very current, but something that still continues the tradition, you could say, of the work of Candelis, Josic and Wood, Coder, and others. And I think this link with a tradition that's contemporary, which is also different than many of the other kind of young practices whose fascination is primarily with form or with process, is a distinguishing mark of their work. Of course, the Yokohama Terminal was the important project, the starting project, but since then they've gone on to design many other competition projects and buildings now in Spain, in Groningen, in many other places in London, and I would just like you to join me in welcoming Farshid, Moussavi, and Alejandro, Zaera, Polo.
I think the other way around, no? Because this one is taller. Okay, thank you very much for the invitation to be back at the AA. That 2 years ago that we haven't been around as often as we were once. The lecture that we've prepared is going to present a series of current projects that we've selected from the work that has been done during these 2 last years that we've been away from here, in a way, and we are going to do the lecture in such a way that I'm going to introduce 3 projects and Farshid is going to make noise now and then we are going to reverse, and she is going to introduce 2 other projects, and I am going to make noise. So, as a in this kind of return to the AA, we thought that it was perhaps a good idea to present in the lecture the work that we've done in these last 2 years that has been 2 very, very exciting years. And I think it has been a very special moment because it has been a moment in which we moved from being more concentrated in our academic practice, which is also a practice, and it's a very important practice, and we've been lately more concentrated on our professional practice. And what has happened is that in this moment of leaving perhaps the more academic situation and moving towards the professional situation, we have found ourselves surrounded by a fantastic team. What I can say is perhaps the best team in the world. And it looks like a joke, but it's not a joke. I think that this actually is a very special situation when you have the privilege to teach, to construct a certain discourse with a number of people. It's not only your own discourse, it's a discourse that to which people who were in the unit and then went to the office also contributed and continue contributing decisively. And I think what has been really incredible, and we don't know in a way how to or whether it is actually possible to maintain that consistency of capacity and of interest that has characterized, I think, the office in the last 2 years, whether we can actually continue doing this, operate in this way once we get perhaps more established. And that's why I say that even more established architects who also have the privilege of perhaps choosing carefully their collaborators, I think that there is a moment in which it's not so simple to generate teams of the consistency that we have had the privilege of having in the last 2 years.
I'm supposed to add noise. So
please.
I think the idea was the idea was that our team was more consistent because we had time, especially at the AA, to develop this team, and the whole kind of practice of teamwork at the AA, and to do it with that same team and move on to practice in the office together is an exceptional opportunity that perhaps some of the larger practices that also choose their team, they are very selective, may not necessarily have this consistency or this close relationship with their collaborators. So what we are trying to do is that the teaching and the practice are finally they have been important together. So it hasn't been about moving from practice, from teaching to working on projects outside, but more about taking this workforce with you and to work with them. And obviously, a majority of that comes from the AA.
Yeah, I think it's also important, and in these 2 years of practice, it has become more evident to us to mention our practice of reference, which is basically OMA, where we were before teaching here, and that is also a practice. I mean, we've come to think that the people who have been teaching here have developed a certain form of practice, and it's quite interesting that actually our previous experience before starting the practice on our own was passed also in an office that had also the connection or the background to the AA. I think that background is very important in everybody that we know who has been teaching here, and I think you can synthesize it in the fact that it's a practice very similar to the practice that you do here in the units, that is based on that construction of a certain culture, construction of an ideological consistency. It's not to teach architecture or to practice architecture as a kind of pure activity of production. Is much more intense than that, and I think all these people who have gone through the AA have that in the DNA of their practices. So we have in these 2 years very often remember our years also at OMA. Almost daily, and we've come to realize through our experience why things were happening there on a different level, not just on the design level, but also on the level of organization of the team, of relationship between people, that many of the things that were happening perhaps we couldn't understand, and we now understand much better. And finally, and before going into the description of the projects, I think there is another feature, another thing that is very special of these 2 years of practice, that is the fact that we are mainly in London, where we have an office in London and now an office in Japan for the Yokohama project. But the situation also of coming out of London, of the AA, which is a kind of multicultural and multinational institution, also puts you in a certain situation to have to practice both in many different places, in many different cultures, and also with people from different backgrounds, from different cultures also. And we think that actually the fact that you have to operate in that situation is absolutely determinant on the practice, and perhaps one of the most interesting things that today we are not yet able to do, perhaps, but we start to identify in this practice, international practice over these years, the potential of seriously theorizing about how material practices can develop and can use opportunities that are specific to certain locations. The same way that we are also trying perhaps to be more deliberate that OMA was about working with multinational backgrounds. I mean, this is a bit of a joke, but I think it's quite interesting. We looking back at our experience, perhaps the generation of Rem, or the generation of Sahar, the generation that is now 50-something, was the first generation that faced this condition of practice, multinational practice, and also teams that are multicultural. And in a way, we look at our years at OMA as if it was United Colors of Benetton, where everybody was, I mean, there was some kind of very interesting landscape of cultures, and we think that we always say that we are much more deliberate, and we are trying to use this situation to more precise purposes, and we classify our workforce, our population, using categories from British military intelligence in Gurkhas and Sherpas. So there are, and I think this is actually quite interesting because the Gurkhas are those elements, those parts of the population of the office who are deterritorialized, and therefore they are particularly fierce at taking projects in other places they don't know, because they can be brutal with them. And the Sherpas are those people who actually know what is going on and help the team to operate effectively in a certain site, in a certain domain. So, for example, in Japan, which is a very, very difficult country, all the team is made out of Sherpas, although there were some Gurkhas at the beginning of the project. But so they change. You know, sometimes the Spanish Gurkhas turn into Spanish Sherpas, and the Japanese Sherpas. Anyway, so this is basically a kind of an account or a small reflection on what has happened in the office during these 2 years. And now I'm going to move as quickly as possible to present the it was open already. To explain the projects that, as I was saying, they are not yet. I mean, this is not a lecture to try to make a certain theoretical proposal of a way of practicing. Is more than that. Is a kind of description of opportunities that we found in 5 different locations. 3 of them are 3 public projects in Spain. Those are the ones I'm going to talk about, and the other 2 are project in Holland and Yokohama, which obviously has been a very important part of the work we've done recently. This is seriously slow.
You can start, Farshid.
Yes, I can start. The first project the first project is that hopefully we'll see soon, is a project that was a competition we won in Barcelona a bit more than a year ago, to construct a large urban park, coastal park by the waterfront. Let me see if I can go immediately into the. There are lots of slides, as you can see. So. So this project is to be located in this area of Barcelona. This is the Diagonal, and is part of a whole series of operations that Barcelona City is now developing to finish this end of the Diagonal that has been always occupied with these industrial programs, and now is becoming, or the city wants it to become a new center in Barcelona, in order to serve as a vehicle of regeneration of all the fabric that lies between this point and the more developed, the more central areas of the fabric. The project is actually to be built on reclaimed land on this edge of the waterfront. There is a very large purifying water station that is supposed to be covered with a slab that will make a very large hard surface and will leave these industrial facilities hidden and provide a surface for trade shows, etc., etc. And our park will is a band of about 500 meters by 100 meters running along the coastline after the surface, that is supposed to mediate between the edge of the plate, this slab that will cover the water purifying plant, and the bathing area that will be built just by the waterfront. So we started working with a model that was the model of dunes, and this model was mainly it was aimed at doing two things, which were what we understood were the two opportunities of the project. Because we had to, the park has to bridge between a level 12 and a level +4. There is quite a steep gap between the level of the platform and the level of the waterfront. We needed to provide some kind of more, let's say, interesting but also more comfortable ramped access that will not go in direct, perpendicular to the waterfront, but on the contrary will trace these diagonal paths. And at the same time, because the city wanted to have a park there, some kind of vegetation, the dunes will form a topography that will protect from the breeze from the sea certain areas of the park where vegetable species could grow. And this is the kind of topography that we envision. There was also another program that we were given by the client at the beginning, which was that we had to locate certain auditoriums, open-air auditoriums in the park, and that was what we also used as a criteria to generate the geometry of these dunes that will construct the edge of the city. Now, the client actually didn't have a very clear program at the onset of the project, and there was quite an extended phase of discussion of what the program could be. Originally, they told us that they wanted to have a very large auditorium. We soon realized that it didn't fit. But somehow that idea of a green park started to drift towards a more hard surface that has that topography, has also some plantation, and a hard surface that can be used for performances or public events that cannot be located in the center of the city. So one of the programs that we started investigating in order to get the orders to generate the topography were extreme sports. The park will become some kind of place or surface where the relationship between the physical self and the landscape is tested in different degrees. And we did these categorizations of these extreme sports topographies and also auditoriums, the programs basically that we were considering. We did also a lot of sampling of performance spaces, projection screens, etc., trying to identify the geometry, because the more we were evolving the project, the more we realized that what was interesting about this park was that it had an ambiguous condition between what we understand as a park, as a traditional park, a place where you sit, a topography that is not particularly specific about its functions, and a series of performance spaces. So when there are performances, these topographies work as auditoriums, as a sequence of auditoriums. When there is no performance, when there are no events, they become a park. So there was a process in which we consult different festivals in the city. We start also considering the orientation of the auditoriums and the access to the auditoriums, because some of the auditoriums had quite a large capacity, 10,000 people, 8,000 people. And finally, out of all this sampling of let's say, open-air performance topographies, we come up with this ellipse that has a proportion that allows us to orient performances in different directions. For example, to throw the sound in the direction of the city when the sound is not going to be harmful to the neighbors, but to be able also to reverse the orientation. And we made this prototype of that performance space and the series of ramps that are going to be mediating the topographies of the site. And we devised this system that, in a way, is a prototype. It could be extended ad infinitum. That is able also to produce different scales of performances, adjusting to the periphery of the site. That is basically the first topography that is created. This is here. You can see roughly what is happening with the other projects. This is an esplanade that is designed by Elias Torres that is covering the water purifying plant. So we are bordering there, and this is done by Beth Gali, and this is done by Jack Herzog, and this is done by José Luis Mateo, and so on and so forth. So there is a very important series of buildings that is now being planned and being built already in some cases. So these are some of the images that we made originally to approximate what the park will look like. And obviously there was another material. In a way, all the projects always are about making more and more, integrating more and more materials into the projects in a consistent manner. The greenery had to be a consistent material with that topography we had generated, and these are studies that we did in order to locate different modules of species to grow in certain locations of the park. Then we moved into the construction of these topographies. We needed hard surfaces. These were things that greatly inspired us. How to clad, in a way, a topography, a landscape with a certain architectural detail, and how that architectural detail adjusts to the contingencies of the topography. So in this case, we had to make hard surfaces for these events, for these exhibitions, and we started thinking about a system of tiling the landscape, in a way. Was the problem we identified as the problem that will generate the project on that smaller scale. And since we had to have hard surfaces and greenery, green ground and hard paving, we started thinking how the tile can also have spaces left for the grass to grow in between, and how the borders of the tiling will automatically generate these differentiating patterns of tiling. This is what happens when you start sliding a certain type of tile around each other. We did several studies of tiling. We actually liked this idea of tiling very much working in Barcelona, because, as you know, Barcelona has a great tradition of tilers. Jujol and Gaudí used to work also with irregular tiling in irregular surfaces. The difference here was that we were trying to accommodate the contingency of the topography with a regular tile, with a regular system. These are just more examples, because obviously also the trees had to be planted in the tiled areas, and we were trying different non-directional tiling systems that would allow us also to open the places for the trees. And finally, we settled for this system that it is based on a conveyor belt, like an airport conveyor belt, which is basically a system of tiles that follows a line and adjusts to a certain perimeter and can fill the plane by following this parallel line. We had to make a program in order to place these tiles, because we had something like 150,000 tiles. Here you see what the program does, which is to adjust the tiling pattern to the conditions of two borders, and then proliferate the tiling almost as a knit through the whole surface of the park. We liked also the fact that tiling system was linear, was consistent with this linearity along the coastline that the structure of the dunes had, and so it was also bifurcating in certain locations. You can see how this conveyor belt pattern is actually able to do this, and these are some of the details of these bifurcations of the ground. It's just about our obsession with tiling. So this is also what happens with the topography of the park. The park, as I was saying, has dunes and has planted surfaces, and in some areas the dunes are also inhabited. And what we did with the system, the ground retaining systems of the dunes, was to also use another variation, let's say, of the same tiling system, which it was something that, if you translate it from the Spanish, sounds like reinforced earth. Which is a system in which the tiles are connected to a bar of steel that goes inside the dune, and as the earth is compacted, it makes the structure self supportive. So this was the piece of the tile, which is much bigger than the one in the floor, for these retaining walls. And these are some of the effects that this round tile that also adjusts to an irregular geometry produces. The inside of the walls, I think, is not so important. Auditoriums were also treated following the same idea, this idea of the tiles, the round tiles, and you can see also we designed a piece that was some kind of extrusion of the ground tile, and that produced this auditorium. This is the piece. Everything is made in precast, or will be made in precast concrete, and through that observation of a smaller scale, we corrected, we fixed finally the geometry that will determine the park. The plantation of the trees, I went too far, but I think we can see it. We can see it. The plantation of the trees also follows a similar system in which the more resilient species to salty breeze are located closer to the waterfront, protecting the more delicate species in this system of layers that then is deployed to preserve certain views from the platform towards the sea. And also you can see here the under dunes with some complementary facilities, connection to a car park that is at the back of the park, a kind of disco that is also part of our project, there is some kind of depth around the park. This is the final geometry that the setting up of the drainage sectors of the park, that we also make them consistent with this kind of dunar geometry. Sections, I think that maybe it's not so necessary to explain much more. This is what I was explaining before about the way of the grid of planting trees inside this hard, what sometimes is hard, sometimes is green surface. But they are planted in such a way that you can go perpendicular to the dunes in order to cut the green with a machine. So that there is also a whole series of knowledge about how the maintenance of the park will take place that generates these grids and the densities of the trees on top of the dunes. And finally, hopefully will look more or less like a park. Second project is a smaller project. It's a project for the police headquarters in a little village in the south of Spain, a village called Villajoyosa, a village of about 25,000 people. That is now becoming a hot property of the real estate in the area south of Benidorm, and is improving the facilities, the public facilities of the town. This is the site. It now is a kind of parking area and on the outskirts of the city. And as you can see, the landscape behind is characterized by mountains and kind of old farms. But on some areas, on some edges of the site, you also see the beginning of the city starting. It's a very rundown place. So basically, one of the first impressions that we had when we started doing the project was that the project, rather than being part of this, being part of the city, had to be part of those other landscapes of fences, stone fences and reservoirs and orchards and trees that happen towards the outskirts of the city. And the site is that triangular piece that you can see here. It's actually not only the municipal headquarters, it's also the reorganization of the railroad platforms that run along the coastline. So it's actually quite an interesting place, because here we have the main access into the town from the highway. The center of the town is somewhere here, and here we have the line of the tram that goes between Benidorm and Alicante, stopping in all the village, the villages, the coast villages. So our approach, as I was saying, was to try to make a very low building, almost a building that is part of the ground, that is a fence, a closed fence, and studying the geometry of the site. Also, we had this idea that because it's a police building, it had to be kind of secret. So it had to be enclosed. It had to minimize the ratio between perimeter and area. It had to be as close as possible to a round thing. So what we did was to just offset the lines of the perimeter, and then we chopped these two edges to keep the area that we wanted that the building required more or less within that compact form, and then we obtained this pentagon. And this was critical, because everybody in town thought it was great to have a pentagon. It became it's already a famous building before it's built, and now even more famous after the September 11th. This is the Pentagon. We always looked at it as a kind of rock, as a kind of thing that is broken. Is not very clear what is happening inside, and this top surface or profile of the edge was generated by skylights. The building is secret. It's like a fence, and it's all lit from the top. And it's organized in plan. We'll see it probably later. But the idea is that the building has this kind of system of skylights that brings light into the different bays that compose the plan and construct the perimeter of the profile of the mass. This is the system. This looks kind of immediate, but it was actually very complex to generate, because we started with this jagged edge that will at the same time produce the skylights, but also the drainage of that surface. And we were moving along the base. We structured the Pentagon in these three bays or directions of bays around a central courtyard, because below there is actually a prison that is lit by this courtyard. There is one floor below. But what was complicated to do was and we had to do this by trial and error, was basically to start with that profile and keep extending it with a certain slope and negotiating it with the bays that are in a different direction. But sometimes the edges of the roof will go too high or too low, or you will have head clearance problems. It was actually a very difficult problem. As you can see, the walls inside are tilted. This is also very funny. I think that the police boss couldn't really see it at the beginning, and only recently, when the project was approved, realized that and was quite surprised. The section is 2 floors. The top floor is where all the brigades operate, and the bottom floor there is a garage, there is a kind of small detention center with cells, and there is a shooting gallery for practicing. So these are the sections of the offices. The grids maybe not, and this is basically how the building will feel from inside. We are doing this building all in raw concrete, but with a tinge, kind of earth tinge. The idea is that it becomes really like a piece of stone, of local stone. And the other interesting thing is that normally when you have these kind of skylights, they are very high, but in this case they are most of the times at 2 meters 10. So you will have skylights, but at a very low height, which we think will be quite a special thing. Well, you saw in that one, I forgot to mention that these canopies are also part of the operation. These are the plans, the shooting gallery on this edge, the small prison with the cells looking onto the courtyard here, and the parking on that side. And this is the upper floor, where there is a bay of public facilities, a bay of administration, and a bay of brigades or offices, and some kind of public courtyard. The other interesting thing is that obviously we wanted it to be closed, but we thought we couldn't close it completely. So we started thinking, how can we provide windows to the offices on that first floor? And we came up with this pattern of bullet holes. That form some kind of lattice in front of the real windows that are normal aluminium windows behind. Actually, they are not aluminium windows; they're steel windows, because they have to be quite tough. These are more kind of controlled studies of this pattern and roughly what the pattern does in the facade. And these are some photographs also, including the canopies and the paving of the plaza that, as you can see, is also part of our recent obsession with tiling. And the last project, which is a commission that we won recently as a result of a competition also in the south of Spain, in another touristic village, which is, the project was, the place is called Torrevieja, and the project is the remodeling, is the building of an auditorium theater that will be occupying the place where the traditional theater was, and the remodeling of this plaza that is in front of the theater. So the site for the theater is here. This is the area that can be built as a corner of a block, and then we have to remodel the plaza in front. This is the waterfront, and this is really the center of the town. This is the site after the theater collapsed, and the plaza in front is incredibly ugly. So basically, the first strategy that we had a program that in this case was as opposed to what happened in Barcelona or in Villajoyosa, where the program was quite vague. Here we have a very specific program. We had to have 650 seats, VIP room, blah, blah, blah. So we realized quite soon that the site was actually small for the program we had, and that there was no way of doing things that were too extravagant, because in a way what the building was doing was to close the existing block. So the first move we made was to say, well, we had a certain idea of how do we want this theater to be. We want the theater to try to break the division break the proscenium, make the seating area become eventually part of the stage. So what we did was to simply fit into the site the largest box that we could, where we would put the scene and the seating area together, and use these areas that were left between that box and the firewall as the complementary, the supporting facilities. Because of the limitations of space, the other thing that became also quite clear to us was that the only way to fit the theater there was to have the foyer immediately under the seating area. So we started developing the possibility of making the foyer and even bringing the foyer a little bit lower, because we had problems of fire escape of the foyer. So this edge had to be as close as possible to the ground level, but at the same time we needed to put inside of here the foyer. And since part of the project was also the remodeling of the plaza in front, we started to consider maybe the possibility that there is no border between the foyer and the plaza. So there is some kind of continuous space across them, and that the way to make this building, to give to the building a scale of a public building, was, rather than making formal gestures, to simply fill out the maximum volume that was allowed by regulation. So take the edge of the building to the limit and build as high as we can, and simply produce this cut in that mass of the building where the foyer or where the plaza will go into the foyer. So this was basically the idea, that that we proposed. We think that what will be more interesting of the project would be that this big belly that is generated automatically by the geometry of the seats is cantilevering 25 meters in every direction. So we also made it very heavy. We cladded it in stone so that you will almost have the feeling that you are in the plaza and you go under a very, very large and heavy stone that is hovering over the public space. This is basically also that there was a certain treatment of the plaza with trees, etc. But we are not going to get into this. There was the idea was very, very simple. Was to make a theater that doesn't have almost any fat, and it was much more of a typological research than about the synthesis of new topography. So basically we knew that we were very limited, and all we tried to do is to say, well, what will happen if normally when you look at plans of theaters, or when you go to theaters, you have this stuff around the room. And in this case, because of the limitations of space, what we did was to take the sitting area to the edge of the theater. And then we did a lot of research in terms of how to make the ramps, how to make also the public ground, like all these are analysis of ramps in the foyer for handicaps, etc., and the areas that result for cafeterias and foyer. And we did several of these tests, not only as ramps but also as a kind of auditorium under the auditorium. We quite like the idea that the ground of the plaza sinks down by the effect of the weight of that thing that is floating on top of it. And finally, this is the configuration of the foyer with this kind of deformation of the ground or ramp. Here, in a way, we see also the section, two entrances on ground level to the main room, and one fire escape. But you can imagine that all this is glass. So all this area is under the big cantilever. This is basically the effect of the foyer, and the ground level going down under the belly. And obviously, as part of this typological research, location of corridors, and also there was, because of the limitations of space, a lot of problems to keep the 650 seats and at the same time provide an orchestra of the right scale. So there was a kind of pressure between the orchestra and the seating area that these drawings give account of, until we finally fixed it in this geometry, where also what was interesting is that we had to enlarge the orchestra to touch the edges of the proscenium, which we thought was quite consistent, typologically speaking, with this idea of blurring the limit between stage and seating area. Anyway, this is what the geometry of the acoustic ceiling will be like. This town where we are building the project is famous for salt lakes, and these salt lakes have become some kind of the image of the town. So we sold to the mayor the fact that once you are inside the theater, you are like in a salt crystal. Now actually everything is white. Now, I mean, this is from the competition stage, but we want the seats to be made out of white leather. and the ceiling to be made out of plastic, translucent plastic, almost as if when there are lights, everything is white, and then suddenly everything becomes black. So this the geometry of this false ceiling is obviously also has been a matter of research in which we have had to test different possibilities for the arrangement so that they actually work acoustically. We are working with acoustic consultants, and they do. We reshape the ceiling, and they tell us whether the noise is efficiently distributed in the room or not. So these studies, in a way, are what will finally fix the geometry of that salt crystal. This is the one we have now, and the way that the geometry of that ceiling has been evolving through different tests. The belly. I mean, this is simply to explain to you that the opportunity here was not so much about inventing something completely new, but on the contrary, to be incredibly specific to different parts of a conventional typology and play with them. These are different arrangement of the seating area with curvatures to answer to both fire escapes, and also the air conditioning is placed under the seats. It's a kind of plenum where the air comes from. So we have to introduce the structure, the air conditioning, the visual conditions, and we do hundreds of tests of this in order to fix this profile of the edge that will define the belly. And this is the section as it is now. You can see that also we have a function room on top that helps us to use the space in order to make the volume of the building this big block of stone. That is this room. And I think now I'm going to let Farshid continue and make some noise.
Now you know that the production drawings are done by the Spanish in the office, given the spelling mistakes. This is the second time round. Just very quickly, because simply there is less time and this is a smaller project than Yokohama, we were invited by Toyoito for, I think I don't need this. Can you hear me? No? I hear myself too much. Okay, this is better. Can you hear me? No? No, I hear myself. Can you hear me now? Okay. We were invited as part of a master plan that Toyoito has organized for the city of Groningen for an architectural festival that the city hosts every 2 or 3 years. And this year, the title was called Blue Moon, and 4 offices were invited, and each given 2 sites, one in the inner city, this being our site, and one in this area just on the periphery called Europa Park. So we were given 1 site, 2 sites and we were asked to somehow thematically relate the two, to find a relationship between the two. Our inner city site was to be a house, and our Europa Park project was initially to be a station, a temporary station, and a market, and eventually became a performance space and a market. We started, given this regular festival in Groningen, working with the idea of nomadism and how this could be a possible theme that would relate the two projects. Programmatically, the tent, the pavilion in the Europa Park was already in tune with that, since it was supposed to be a temporary station and also a market. And we proposed that the house would also become more of an apart hotel, that it would actually not have fixed inhabitants, but that would be rented to these visitors to the festival. The tent also, we eventually, as I said, the brief of it changed to a market and a performance space. This is the site of our apart hotel in the inner city. As you see, a small site facing a square. This would be our site here. And we started also working with fabrics as a nomadic tectonic, and how we could link the two projects by using fabrics, to build them out of fabrics. The house, we were inspired by how it could be like a sleeping bag, one that you would kind of, it will almost wrap you this fabric. And these were the images that we produced at the beginning of how the skin could be made out of this, as I said, fabric that would have literally zips that you could undo, and that somehow the traces of this migrant population that would colonize it for different periods of time would appear on this facade, and it would give you a number of choices on the interior, depending on how you wish to frame on the outside, or where you would wish to have privacy, etc., etc. It's interesting talking about these 2 years and the fact that we've been working in a number of countries, to also maybe mention that they do all, they bring with them a whole different culture each time. And we've found that you have to be incredibly efficient in how you operate in each one of them, because they are very, very different. For example, we found that in Holland, the clients are incredibly open, very, very open. In fact, they loved the idea of our sleeping bag, and encouraged us to go quite far with it. And yet, the construction costs in Japan at the beginning were not set, are incredibly low. So we... Did I not say Holland? Sorry, in Holland. That's good. Are incredibly low, and we had to become, we had to face this and try to find a way to keep some of these earlier experiments or ideas in the project, and yet move on with the project. This is when the fabric became impossible due to costs and also some technical constraints. We started working with a more metal fabric, a chain link, again working with ideas of mounting it on rails that would allow you to, again, open it up in a less prescribed way than having windows on a facade. So you would actually, it would be an interactive, let's say, skin. We ended up with we had to face having to use a ready-made system, and chose a standard alum perforated steel paneling system, and which cladded the facade. We obviously still kept the idea of a silo, a very discreet and almost closed to the outside volume that allowed you to open the skin in a number of ways. These are, for example, ways to open the inside, and again, there are some of, let's say, the earlier fascinations carried out, but obviously not any longer in fabric. This is just recently completed. We have a glass skin, again, a standard glazing system behind this, and had to just concentrate on seeing how we can detail it in a way that it is not just a standard system. How do you wrap the corners? How do you fix the cladding system? How do you relate the cladding system to the glazing system behind? How do they work together? How do they appear together? This is how it would be like, obviously, at night. The tent project, I should say the pavilion project, became a tent since we chose to work with fabrics, and we were given a site to begin with that then moved on top of a concrete plinth that we were told to work with the foundation of. Incidentally, I must say that we worked with Adams Carroll Taylor on this project. We proposed that the fabric would be imprinted with a camouflage pattern so that it would be like an artificial forest. Images of how it could be in a market situation. And the geometry was defined looking at the various entrances and approaches that we had to consider. We were later told that there would be a round table brought in for the events of performance, and obviously the position of the columns, etc., were all dictated by this table. This is the final geometry of the tent. Some other drawings of the final form. We tried to lighten the columns by working with tensile options that, again, due to budget and time, were not possible. And these are some images of the tent. Again, the camouflage scale, I mean, I'm not making an excuse, but just explaining that it is very different to what I will show you later on in Japan, that time was so short, and that, in fact, this process of integration of information that we are so obsessed with becomes incredibly, let's say, short and narrow, and you have to learn to be efficient in other ways. Some of the other images of the tent. And now, Yokohama, for those people who don't know the site, it is on the Osambashi Pier, the blue area. We were told that the project has to become a ferry terminal mixed with some civic uses. Here you see it in right behind this ship. And our addition to the project was that this, looking at the context, that there was an incredible opportunity for the scheme to become a public space, as well as containing the program that the client was requesting. There was an obvious gap in the context, in a chain of public spaces facing the waterfront, some of them currently being developed also, that if the Osambashi Pier was to also be declared a public space, the city would be able to host a series of a continuous set of open spaces, with the pier obviously having the largest intrusion onto the water. The project starts having declared it a public space, looking at the programmatic circulatory looking at the dynamics of the system, looking at the circulation, and we proposed this no-return diagram that aimed to mix the path of the citizens and the passengers as a way of activating further the space of the terminal, and also to present the users with a multiplicity of ways to weave in and out of the building, avoiding the regular or the conventional cul-de-sac structure that you find yourself in piers. We then had to give geometric substrate to this programmatic diagram, to the no-return diagram, and given that we had said the building would be a public space, we used the urban ground to replace or to give geometric consistency to this two-dimensional circulation diagram. So the ground would branch to make the connections that the no-return diagram was trying to make connections across, and these would be the kind of the specificities, let's say, of this ground from the route to the end of the pier. And obviously the form that was generated out of following the no-return diagram that was based on program and making a series of transversal sections to make the connections of the circulation diagram. The images that we produced were also trying to talk about these continuities between different levels carrying different people, different functions, relationship between inside and outside. These are all themes that we try to explore in the project to diminish segmentation in a number of ways between circulation routes, between inside and outside, between terminal and, let's say, international and domestic space structure and skin that I will come on to. We then went to give physical content, introducing the material aggregate to the project, looking for to be consistent with what we had already, which was a folded organization, and propose that the structure would be made out of folded steel, folded steel plates. The entire structure would be made out of folded plates of steel that would be this other scale of, let's say, folding introduced to the project. Another scale of program, a smaller scale that we had to distribute throughout the space, that we treated as sediments, as uses that would be sedimented by this drift of people that would move through the terminal, but would be always along the side of the circulation and would leave the space in the middle uninterrupted. So these are the kind of smaller colored areas that you see. And this was, let's say, an image that we ended up with. A last decision at the kind of initial phase was what to do with this rooftop, or how to use it, or whether one would assign spaces, the spaces with specific functions. And we did a test of seasonal uses, imagining how the specificities of the different regions of the rooftop would encourage a variety of uses over time, but basically leaving it unassigned and simply adding some elements that would environmentally complement the space of the roof. And these were some of the images that you. So the space was left almost as a surface that would be colonized by the citizens in a number of ways. Now these are the plan of the terminal level across from year 96, just after the competition, until when we started construction a year ago, just to show that it has been a continuous process of abstraction of information coming into the project. Rather than growing new diagrams, the single diagram of the building has been constantly shifting. If you look closely, there are quite radical changes between plans. And what is perhaps interesting to mention, given what I said before about Holland, is that in Japan, you do the bidding drawings, the detailed design drawings, and the shop drawings are done on site, which means that the construction phase is an incredibly intense time for design, that the real design actually happens at the construction phase. And this is obviously has been very interesting for us, given our obsession, as I said, with the add-in. And I think the project well illustrates that. When we started detailed design, one of the largest questions of the project was the structure. As much as it was interesting, it was also naive and needed a lot of study. The basic problem has to solve this three-dimensionally complex geometry, with a geometry that was basically axial, this folding of this piece of steel. And one of the first alternatives that we tried was to displace the folds of the web every half fold and weave them to produce a surface. This has been obviously, maybe going back to this, has been tested by people by Nerville or Piano. In this case, it was particularly interesting because the folding would be differentiated at all points along the surface, almost much like an organic system. Again, another question of the project was whether to remain faithful to the bidirectional nature of the plan of the terminal that we had. or to remain with the more this single surface idea that seemed to want to absorb singularities within one congruent space. So which to opt, because they were clearly in conflict with each other. We did initially a test of the original, what was named the cardboard structure, and a space frame with local densification, and realized that the axial forces along the length of the building, or the large folds in the longitudinal way, were so large that the structure had to become concrete filled, and it was clearly not efficient. And this was the reason why, despite the images of the building, we decided to go with the bidirectional option, and that's the scheme that has been developed. A series of large folds along the length of the building, bridged by a series of smaller folds in the transversal direction. These are some of the images. We removed also the lower plate of the web and exposed let's say the origami construction, some of the other contextual material that the project tried to relate to, were the tradition of origami in Japan, and obviously we had tried to bring in this to the project as a material organization rather than mimicking it as an image. And now we had found a way to really turn it into an expressive trait of the project. These are some of the images when the lower plate is removed. And this choice of the bidirectionality of the structure had a very important impact into the project, in the sense that one of the criticisms that we received from various people after the competition was that the plan of the terminal that you see here of the competition was mainly Beaux-Arts and symmetrical. Now, we did know that it was symmetrical, but didn't found any problem with symmetry as an ideological kind of problem. The terminal worked in as a symmetrical structure, because you had cruise ships on both sides, and all the facilities were systematically needed to be repeated on both sides. So to have imposed asymmetry would have been simply forced for us. However, when we started working, so these were the lower level condition that was actually asymmetrical, because the grounding condition that we were given by the project was asymmetrical. We could not land on one side any closer than 21.5 meters, and on the other side 29 meters. So there was an asymmetry on the lower level. But when we started looking at this bidirectional option, we had to start correlating the lower level girders and the upper levels to coincide the girders and the ramps of the two levels, and obviously the asymmetry started growing through the section of the building. And as you see, this is the lower level, and this is the upper level, and the plan of the terminal is no longer symmetrical. We then faced another obviously problem in the detailed design, which was the increase in the resolution of the grid of the building. We had to produce a lot more information to describe the form. Initially, the transversal sections were made at every 15 meters. This was clearly not a sufficient description of the form. The first attempt we did was to introduce two intermediate sections, and we did this by introducing what is called control lines, which were lines that linked the points of location of specific elements that we had from the brief, and that we were connecting with our circulation diagram. And then by cutting this control line intermediate planes, we were able to obviously locate other elements along the length of the building. We found at this point that this was the first moment when we were moving away from another conflict in the project, a conflict that was perhaps between a parallel band technique that we were unconsciously probably inheriting and bringing forward from our experiences of certain projects at OMA, from La Villette to the Grand Bibliothèque to the Den Haag City Hall, that tried to create maximum sectional flexibility across sections by the parallel band techniques. Well, now this was clearly not what we were trying to organize with our circulation diagram, which was all about finding systems of coherence, finding connections across levels. At the time of the competition, maybe lack of thinking or the fact that the building tended to be long in length, we found it efficient to use the parallel band techniques. Now, the control lines were the first argument of coherence or consistency that we started introducing across the sections. These were the next set of sections that were produced. We moved from 15 sections to 24 sections to 96 sections to 124 sections, each time having to produce an incredible amount of information to produce the sections. And every time there was any change for the client, we had to redraw the entire set of sections. And the client didn't understand, why do you have to draw, another 30 sections either way if we are only asking you to change a tiny thing. So we were really exhausted at this point. This was really the image of the office every day for a year, an office that worked until 3 in the morning as an average, 7 days a week. A very small workforce, but an incredible workforce that managed to produce the work. And we had to find basically another way to do this. It wasn't feasible. This is when we started looking at ways to produce regularity across sections to make the structure more regular. We started working with rolling single templates along the control lines that initially were these spline curves, and at this point we dropped them for complex curves in order to have more control over their definition, and so that these templates would be rolled very much like the construction of roller coasters, where single templates are rolled along a three-dimensionally complex geometry and that have also a local referencing system. These were the setting out of the control lines and the rolling along, this kind of sweeping of single templates along them. Again, drawings of these, since the control lines were three-dimensional, the templates being rolled along them were also, it meant that they were not orthogonal but were tilted, and the colors relate to batches that would be brought on, batches of construction. These are the inventory of templates of the girders, the longitudinal folds along the length of the building. We, at the same time, looked in seeing how can we produce more regularity in the transversal folds, and realized that because we were initially setting out an orthogonal grid of transversal folds against these control lines that were producing the girders now, and that were curved, every single one of the folds were being cut by these lines, and that every single one of them was going to be different. And obviously this was not efficient. This is when we started to tilt the transversal folds parallel to the face of the girders, producing local symmetries, obviously reducing the variation. We did different tests of how the transversal folds could be set out, and the right-hand one, for example, was too expensive. And finally found that the only way we could find, for example, the location of intersection between the stiffeners and the folds, if we were to find these local symmetries, was to write a program that would find through iteration the intersection points. Eventually we found out that we had to choose between more regularity in the girders, the construction of the girders, or regularity in the folds, and given that 60% of the weight of steel was concentrated in the girders, that's what we opted for. And the final version is single templates that are rolled along the girders, and the lateral falls are symmetrical, and the middle ones are anti-metrical. This is the final geometry of the building, what we call now a move away from the orthogonal grid to a topological grid, a grid that uses local referencing systems to set out the pieces of construction. Some of the latest plans, you see the reflected ceiling plan on top of them. And the basic shell that we ended up with, this was like the structure alone. I'll just go through some of the images. And some of the other systems that then started to move, to obviously be brought into the project. We had to think of systems of fencing, handrails, glazing, flooring, ceiling, and what we tried to do was to do what all buildings don't do, which is to use a very reduced palette and to minimize the number of systems, the number of elements that one adds to the project, as a way of exploring further this theme of continuity that we were exploring in the project through the construction, through the circulation, the way of arranging the program, etc. So we have one flooring system, which is wood. It's a raised wood system that then gets differentiated along the length of the building. Sometimes this raised floor is deeper on the upper level because it has to also contain a drainage system. On the lower level, it is less deep because it doesn't have the drainage problem, but in certain areas begins to have pockets for fan coil units, for air to be brought into the space of terminal. And in some areas, for example, in the space of the ramps, it is treated in a rough way to be anti-slip, whereas in the areas that are covered, it is smooth. So looking to see how you can find, to choose one flooring system and use it throughout, and explore how one can differentiate it, how one can use it in a number of ways. Again, another element in the project has been the hand railing system. Maybe you will see some drawings, but we had a number of conditions of hand railing next to the ramps, next to the boarding decks, next to the edges of the roof plaza, and all of these had different requirements. So we have one handrail system that, in the case of the cruise deck, it is collapsible because it needs for the fingers to be rested upon it, so that people would board from the ship onto the building. On the rooftop, it is higher and it has a chain link in order to act more as a fence. For the areas next to the ramps, it is more like a guardrail, and all of these slightly change the basic detail and produce, as I said, a variety of handrail fence conditions. Another has been the glazing, which is very interesting. We have two main glazing conditions along the length of the building and in the transversal direction that allow you entrance. That I have some drawings that I will show you. One final maybe system is a system of canopies. Areas such as this, canopies are like surfaces of wood that obviously have a steel structure that appear as legs, and these legs grow longer or are shorter depending on where the canopies are placed, whether they are supposed to shield you purely from sun or whether they have to shield you also from rain, etc. Looking for different conditions that, again, differentiate the basic system. This is the wood deck system that I was telling you about, that is just beginning to be placed in. Again, this basic surface also has to sometimes contain fireboxes, emergency lights, etc., and it starts affecting the pattern and the way it is set out. The glazing in the length of the building is simply a plane of glass. The only thing that is apart from the fact that it was an incredible effort to have just glass, it was important for us not to have structure in a kind of orthogonal way. But the interesting thing about this system is that the sash is very deep, because these edges of the building are cantilever conditions that have up to 7 centimeters of movement, and the sash is obviously absorbing this possible movement. But when the system remains like that, just a plain piece of glass until it is 5 meters high, and as it grows higher, you need structure. So we started folding or corrugating the glass to deal with the condition of having support, or to use the glass itself to make it self-structural, let's say. So this is when the system starts differentiating. Again, we have glass lobbies that, rather than having glass boxes with structure, we start bending them, folding them in order to make them self-supportive. So these would be the kind of the different glazing images. The basic handrail that I was saying, it's stainless steel pipes that, as I said, their tilt changes when they are linked to a ramp. They are obviously not, they are always connected to the surface that is closest to them. So in the ramps, it's to the more vertical, or if you like, the wall areas of the ramp rather than the floor. Some of the images that were produced just before construction. And I'm sorry, I know it's very long, I'll go very quickly. We had two parts to the construction simultaneously: on-site construction that was mainly piling. We went through about 6 months of piling. This is what the building sits on, which is nobody sees. Some of them go up to 50 meters deep and had to be like brought in 3 pieces that would then be linked on site. And a very large machinery area at the root of the building that is half sunken, again no longer seen. And off-site fabrication that again, starting from the basic plates of steel, the templates for the stiffeners, the girders, that would then be mounted in shipyards in Japan and in Korea, and then would be brought on site with by boats, by ships, to one side, whereas the other side of the building was still operating as a terminal and would be lifted by cranes. The building has also been divided into 3 construction parts by 3 general contractors. So this was another, let's say, efficiency that we had to find within ourselves, how to make 3 contractors do the same thing, where they have total freedom once they are given the contract, in a project that is all about continuity and about somehow same details. So this has been in itself one can talk about. Some drawings of cranes that lift the pieces and place them on site. On the right is the transversal folds that follow after the placement of the girders are made. Some drawings of on-site work inside the girders. You see the kind of the little men. If we go just quickly, and going back to this local referencing system, every piece relates directly to the next piece, and they get anchored onto the foundation. We have tie beams going from one end of the building to the other, tying the piles, but also securing the building down, and then concrete gets filled around them. And we just continue. All the services are coordinated. As you see, these holes, all of them come with the right holes. And the second level then gets mounted. Sorry? No, well, we've had some problems. As you see, all the kind of variations of the girder sections. And then the transversal folds, again, you see they come on boats here. These are the kind of the middle ones. that come in larger pieces on the lateral folds in this way and get mounted on site. And this was maybe a month ago. You see the transversal folds filling in between the girders. The divisions are, this is first division, second and third, and construction starts from the middle of the building, and they work in either end so that then their cranes are disposed, one from the sea and the other one from the land. Some of the fold, the transversal fold drawings, images of them. This is where you see the two levels of the lower level of the transversal folds and the upper. These areas that you see now as being kind of transparent will not, maybe I should say, unfortunately, remain transparent. They are for smoke extracts mainly, and sometimes for ventilation. And they are perforations of the same plate that all the folds are made out of, but because obviously you will have your insulation and the concrete layers on top, they will appear as dark. Some images of the interior. This is probably one of the most recent states of it. Then the cantilevers, the two side transversal folds become mounted onto these brackets that you see come pre-prepared. We have on one side a cantilever of 25 meters. That is quite impressive when you're there. And on the other side, how much is that?
On this side, 14 meters, but
at the end we have 25, and but on the Shinko side, 7 meters. And these are some of the upper level cantilever, the level of the terminal. You see the position of the sash is already there. So the boarding deck would be to this area. Some of the other areas of the cantilever. This is where the large cantilever starts appearing. I mean, this is a nice, I think it will be a very nice moment because you will see pedestrians or people walking up here, taxis and buses dropping off people in front of the terminal, buses and cars going in and out of this location, luggage handling trucks in this area, passengers here and more citizens there. So there is a kind of a real simultaneity of events. Some of the large cantilever, you see this is the 25-meter cantilever that is particularly special because it happens on, the headroom is also very low. Some of the areas where the ramps open up to the rooftop that are almost like baroque spaces that are in some ways surprises that we find now, having gone through this way of adding information to the project, almost as if the project is a narrative, is a script of a series of independent almost decisions. The rooftop again is quite in some ways broken up because of the changes in the topography, and it is very, very nice when you're there because you can already imagine that the different spaces would be used in totally different ways. This is, for example, an area where there would be an open-air auditorium. You have an entrance right here, and in fact it's designed so that cars can also be driven in because the civic facilities at the end may at some point host car showrooms, exhibitions. This would be the main entrance to the building. A kind of approach, but more a real eye view of the entry and some of the latest status of the project. That's it. Thank you very much.
Maybe those people who want to leave could do so quite quickly, so we could have, I think it's important to have some time for questions, but could those of you who want to leave do so right now, please?
We went on very, very late. Yes, all of them. But I was quicker than him. But he has 3 projects.
And the good thing also is that
It's fantastic.
The good thing is also that it's a whole team project. You don't have to, because when you're changing slot, there's a time of the change of slot. So this is much quicker. So
Yes, yes.
and it's all in focus. You don't have to.
I mean, the problem is that you cannot be faster by having 2. I mean, you will have to make them smaller. But you save just a lot of money not doing slides. No?
Yeah, I am so happy. We have slides, scanning slides. And then every time you have to do a new lecture, you have to present it. While with this,
take the time, put the things together.
with this, it's like you have more or less the mother, and then you take the slides. You can also record the lecture.
Can you? Huh.
Lecture,
You record. I see what you mean.
lecture, you need,
Yes. It's just the beginning, I think.
It's just this week it's beginning to, in a way, settle down. Can I please ask you to settle down, though? We need to be... If you're staying, please stay.
Do it later.
I know that there are, I can recognize some of your old students here. I'm sure that they would like to ask you some questions and return the favor of all the questions and all the hard time that you gave them. So maybe they'll ask. But I mean, in a way, don't go back. In a way, it's interesting that you are finishing with the Yokohama project, because it's such an incredible kind of tour de force, and it's been the project that you are both involved with while you're doing the other 4 projects that you showed. And in comparison, the others now seem very simple in a way. Is that deliberate? Are you deliberately trying to also simplify certain things, given what you were saying, especially about the question of when you change one section, you have to change 36 sections? Is the idea now to move towards fewer sections? Or,
No, I would say that the projects are let's say, responses to the opportunities. Each one of them, you know, I would say the Barcelona park is not so different to Yokohama. And in fact, it is as laborious, if you like. I don't think we've become lazy. You know, and I think it has had less time to develop. Looking back at some of the earlier material of Yokohama, they look very naive to us. Maybe they looked as if they have certain promise, but they look naive. So the Barcelona project hasn't had the time to evolve as much as Yokohama, but I think it has as many opportunities. I would say that the Dutch projects had few opportunities, and I try to kind of be honest about them. We haven't got exhausted.
I would never accuse Farshid of being lazy. I think that it wasn't.
No, I think they are simpler because they have simpler problems. As I said, I'm happy that the Barcelona project is in the office now at the same time as the other projects, because obviously Yokohama, you can say clearly it started at a different time. Do you want to add to that? We are. I mean, you said yourself we are very pragmatic. And we are incredibly pragmatic. We don't try to force a certain experiment onto a project. And they are practicing in different countries, in very different cultures, and for example, the fact that we can still to this day design over the Yokohama project is simply because we are still doing shop drawings, and the body of the building is there. And in most other countries, or maybe in every other country, you would have already done the shop drawings for the finishes, but we haven't. We are doing them now. And that means we are still designing, and each one of them are different, I would say.
No, I mean, in respect to this remark, perhaps I mean, it is actually a question on how to operate, what attitude to maintain when you start new projects. Because, for example, when we were still doing Yokohama, we were invited to do restaurants and other things where we ourselves didn't think that always there was an opportunity to do a curvy thing. But because we had been, in a way, classified as doing that kind of work, the client was asking us to do that kind of work. So in some ways, I think what I like about doing other projects is that opens the work in different directions and hopefully removes you from a certain category, as if you always have to do complex surfacey projects. So I think that is for me is liberating to be able to shift and to do projects of different kinds depending on what the opportunities are. It's also a little bit dangerous sometimes because the market gets confused.
One of the things that seems to be happening maybe in the police station, and there are obviously aspects of that in Yokohama, is the special way in which it's not actually curved surfaces, but it is other geometries and triangulations. And can you say something about the shift, in a sense, in terms of the conceptions of geometry in the last couple of years?
Versus the faceted.
Yeah.
Well, Yokohama becomes faceted.
I know, but you've done that while you've been working on it. Maybe this is part of this question of being able to do the working drawings, but certainly one can see that there's a shift to.
I think that I mean the reason why it changes to that system is obvious. It's impossible to build Yokohama with curved geometry because of price.
Okay.
It is impossible.
Well, within our price, I mean.
Within anybody's price, it's a very no. Yeah, but
I think one has to be frank and say we are very interested in finding ways to kind of to look for regularity.
Yeah, but I mean, you could find curvy regularities. You can do curvy regularities. So I think that this is not. No, it simply is not feasible to do a building of that scale. I mean, Frank Gehry's buildings are not as big as this one, and they are not bending the structure, while we were bending the structure. So it was simply impossible to do. But I think what is interesting is, or for me, what is more exciting about the process of development, the detailed design of Yokohama, is that despite the fact that we move from smooth geometry to a faceted geometry, I think that because finally we reintroduce this topological grid, we are still operating in a let's say in a vectorial space. We are not operating any longer in fact we are operating more in a vectorial space when we detail Yokohama than when we do the competition. When we do the competition, we have curvy geometries, but we are operating finally on a Cartesian geometry. Now we are no longer operating a Cartesian geometry. We've jumped, and we've jumped not because we sat down one day and we thought, well, we cannot keep doing Cartesian geometry here. It's because we actually realized that because of manufacturing processes, we could not use, or we could not find economies or efficiencies in the system that we were using. So at some point we shift, and then a posteriori we read that it is actually theoretically more interesting. And I think not only theoretical, I think also experientially. One of the things that happened in the detailed design phase is that we remove the lower phase of the structure, which makes then this effect of origami, which was latent even in the competition brief, in the competition proposal, but that you wouldn't be able to see it. Now there is the appearance of that origami structure outside. You see it when you are inside the building.
Irene, you wanted to ask, can you take a microphone?
I would like to come back to the question which has been already quite a bit touched upon on pragmatism. And there is in your text in 2G, FOA Remix, a very strong and extremely unambiguous definition of architecture, where you say that architecture is the engineering of material life. And I think when one actually look at your work, and as it has just been discussed, I mean, there are some very striking differences from one project to another, which does suggest that the work is pragmatic. But also, I think there are things which seems to be recurrent, and I would suggest maybe there are at least two. One is something to do with the way the office is organized. For instance, that many of the people who work with you have been trained by you at the A, for instance, and also perhaps the metaphor of the military metaphor of the Sherpa and what's the other one? And the second thing, which seems to be a constant, is perhaps geometry, which is a theme which is common to, I think, all the projects. And I think pragmatism in my mind is something where there is no constant, where the concept actually is only tested through the result, and that in each commission you start with a new concept, and perhaps pragmatism actually is something which may not actually be possible. And perhaps to put my question in a very straightforward way, I mean, maybe it's about where is the difference between, as you see it is between architecture and engineering.
The final question?
Well, I was coming back to what you had written in this text, this very strong definition about architecture being the engineering of material life. And so clearly you are architects, not engineers, and engineers are self-professed. I mean, by definition, they are pragmatic. And perhaps there is something which keeps architecture away from engineering.
I think that there is no difference. The only difference is a difference of the fields that you are practicing. So normally engineers practice. Well, there is the difference that if we talk about construction engineering, engineers are normally more specialized in one field, while architects have somehow to cut across a broader variety of techniques. So in terms of how do you operate, I would think that that is the only difference. I don't think there is any difference in terms of the making of or the attitude to make an object. I know a lot of engineers that are fantastic architects and are fantastic designers, and a lot of architects also who are great engineers and who can think technically and evolve technical systems beyond what the definition of the systems are. Now, in terms of, so this is in respect to the last question. I was also surprised by how you finished, because the other thing that you said was that pragmatism is by definition an attitude that will lead you into not repetition or not consistency of a practice. But I think that that's not totally, I mean, that is if there was no other frictions or resistances. But for example, and it's noticeable that you talk also about the organization of the practice. I think that there are certain inertias in the way a group of people operate that produce automatically that repetition. And that if you don't operate like that, you will become incredibly inefficient. So if there is a certain repetition in the work, is perhaps because it needs to exist for us to meet the deadlines. So to some degree, you've developed certain techniques and you know how to do certain things, and some of the techniques you repeat. But I don't think that is necessarily to be less pragmatic. Sometimes it's more pragmatic to repeat things. Sometimes you need to, I mean, it's like you are trained to do things in a certain way, and you tend to be pragmatic, you need to have a certain repetition of those.
Can we get the mic across and then back here, please?
If we take two projects, the Yokohama and the Barcelona projects as the public projects you presented, and think about the geometry and the issues you've been addressing with the geometry concept. I was just thinking what would happen for a Japanese to be walking around Barcelona project and Spanish person working around the Yokohama project. Does this geometry belongs to any cultural or any relationship with the city or with the place you're doing the project? Or is there a very important issue, like you just mentioned, about that the client thought you had a particular style of architecture, so you have to be going through that style and not sort of make it curvilinear or whatever. So is there any link within this geometry and cultural issues or place or site? Or is it just a matter of designing anyway?
No, I would say that there is no. I mean, there is the same link that exists between the relative humidity of the air in Barcelona and Japan. So there is also humidity of the air, and sometimes. I'm talking about this relative humidity because it's about engineering. No, engineering a structure, engineering. Mechanical services basically depart from a number of parameters that acquire certain specificity in one place or the other, but basically the air conditioning system machine is the same. The system is the same, but it has a local specificity. So I would think that is what happens between Barcelona and Yokohama, for example. Is it switched on or no? Is
there, red light.
Okay. Yeah, this question comes from someone who's actually had the privilege of going around Yokohama in the last month, and I must say it's an amazing building, a tremendous sort of baroque space which you can experience through moving through in a way that somehow you can't quite capture totally on photographs and slides. That said, I want to ask you a question that doesn't necessarily let you off the hook. That is that I kind of recognize a slight tension in your work between a very rigorous analysis of a problem and another sort of concern that sort of brings in almost an aesthetic. And perhaps I would point to three different sort of questions. I mean, in the theatre where the salt crystals occur, or in Yokohama on the origami, or indeed in the bullet holes in the police building, it's like these are they are aesthetic, but then it's meant to there's then sort of massaged and made to work sort of acoustically and structurally, but it's not kind of born of a deep-rooted concern for acoustic or structural concerns. And would you recognize that as a tension in your own work?
I think in the case of Yokohama, it comes out in a different way. The origami. I mean, we play with the origami associations, but finally do find ways to incorporate it into the project. For example, through the structure. In the case of the theater project, they are games that we play with, for example, the client. And you're right, they are not based on. We use them.
Yeah, but so we recognize that there is that tension. But I think, yeah, I'm trying to, because it's a good question. Obviously, it's the same thing that Irene was saying. There are certain repetitions. And probably you, in parts of the project, you have a certain luggage that almost comes automatically, and perhaps those are the least interesting moments when you look at the work as a whole, because they are not the moments where new things appear, but the moments where things remain.
No, but I
think that in a way ideally you have to try to limit those moments, but also you cannot possibly do it because otherwise, you know, you have to invent everything from scratch. I guess it happens also to other disciplines, to engineers or to car manufacturers, that once you've done a certain model or you know that a certain system works, maybe in the next project you are focusing on evolving something, and there are some things that remain constant, because if everything is floating, basically you become paralyzed.
I just want to say one thing, sorry about that, which is that I think the aesthetic side is the less interesting side. And when we won Yokohama, we had to go, you know, after the competition. They took us to a press conference, and we were totally unprepared because we never thought we would win. And everybody started asking us, so what's your idea? And imagine, we started trying to say, oh, it's about the circulation, and then adding in the structure, and they were so unimpressed. What they wanted to hear was a flying carpet, you know, etc., etc. And I think that the salt crystal, etc., unfortunately, they come into the project for these reasons, but we've learned our lesson, that the project has different layers. And I think that salt crystal is not the interesting part of the project, but hopefully we'll find a way to explore, to run a certain experiment in the project. But I think it's this side of the projects that are there intentionally.
I'm not going to ask you another question, Irene. No, somebody else? Anybody else? Here? There's a question there. Just go straight back there, and then maybe that could be the last one.
you explain about the scale of international Yokohama International Port compared to Waterloo Terminal, International Terminal?
What? The scale of the port compared to
Waterloo
terminal?
International Terminal.
For Waterloo is probably 400 meters, right? Because the trains are 400 meters. You right? So, but it's obviously bent, so probably takes less room on plan. Yeah.
35.
35 meters. Yokohama is 70 in
So it's
in width
same length, half
and
the width.
same length. Well, a little bit longer than that.
I want to just tell you that I don't want to embarrass these two people, but I've known them at least since they were sort of in the final years of their study, and that's only 10 years ago or thereabouts. I mean, it seems only, because I know that Farshid, 10 more? 11, 12. But it's not that long. And I think that, tonight we've really witnessed something extraordinary, because I think projects like the Yokohama don't come up that often. And when they do, they don't get this kind of treatment. It's really amazing to see the kind of dedication and lack of sleep that this couple have given to their projects. Now they have a child, so I think that they are going to have to rethink in some way, even though Farshid refuses to, their kind of attitude towards architecture. And I wish them the best of luck. Thank you.
What were you going to say? There was a moment when you were going to say something. I think that the question of the aesthetic consistency is obviously important. I think that
No, but I thought Irene's question on geometry was interesting to talk about.
thank you.